everyone, and welcome to Completely Booked, the official podcast of the Jacksonville Public Library. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Gabby.
Today is July 1st, and that marks the beginning of Graphic Novels in Libraries Month. Graphic Novels Month is an innovative, first-of-its-kind program through which the American Library Association's review journal for public libraries will forge key partnerships between libraries and publishers while providing librarians with the tools they need to select, curate, and promote graphic titles for patrons of all ages.
So to highlight the importance of graphic novels, we've brought in our very own graphic novels enthusiast, Shawn Norton. Shawn is the branch manager at the Bill Brinton Murray Hill branch and has been with the library for 9 years. He's also been a huge help in planning the JPL's Comic Con events. So without further ado, here is our interview with Shawn.
Welcome, Shawn.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Shawn.
I've been with the library off and on for a total of 9 years. I've been a part-time shelver in high school to a branch manager today. I used to write comic book scripts, and I've been reading them since I was about 7 or 8 years old. So it's my favorite type of writing and my favorite thing to get people to do.
Tell us a little bit about the history of Graphic Novels Month.
It's brand new, actually, this year. It's a partnership between Booklist and the American Library Association. This year, we got a group called the Graphic Novel Comics Roundtable officially recognized. This is our first year in existence. I'm actually on the outreach committee for that. And so we've been stepping up how much graphic novels are represented and talked about through libraries across the country.
Very cool. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of graphic novels?
Well, the term graphic novels was created by Will Eisner to describe something that he had written. He used to write a comics book called The Spirit, and he moved to doing something that was longer form, more like a novel. And he used this term to describe it. It was a new way of thinking about it. Comic books themselves have been around for a long time. I mean, if you think about it, the combination of words and pictures goes back to cave paintings, hieroglyphs. It's just another extension of that.
And what is the difference between a graphic novel and a comic book?
These days, that's pretty blurry. So a comic book is traditionally published periodically, like a magazine. And graphic novels are published as a collected edition, so a complete story, a novel. But these days, the last 10 to 20 years, major comic book publishers like Marvel and DC Comics have been structuring their stories that they can then collect them for distribution to libraries, to bookstores, and they're called trade paperbacks typically. And those are still graphic novels. They're still a complete story, but they're more like episodes of a TV show than anything else. So it's a really blurry line. Generally speaking, if someone says comic books, they're probably referring to something that comes out periodically, typically superhero fiction, but sometimes self-published like zines. And graphic novels, if they're advertised that way, tend to be a little bit more highbrow.
What misconceptions do people have about graphic novels?
A lot of people think they're for kids, which some of them are and some of them aren't, just like any other type of writing. A lot of people think that they're all fiction. That's not true. There are plenty of nonfiction graphic novels, some of my favorites, actually. And a lot of people think that it's all superheroes, which, again, is just not true. One of my favorites from this past year is Kid Gloves by Lucy Nisley, and it is a nonfiction. It's a memoir. It's about a woman trying to have children. And that is about as far away from a superhero book for kids that you could get.
Right, definitely. Do you have any other books you'd like to suggest?
So it depends on what you like to read. There's a comic for a graphic novel for anyone. So if you typically like romance stories, you may want to try out some of the manga series. You may want to try out one called 12 Reasons Why I Love Her. If you really like action movies, you may want something like the superhero stuff if you're into those movies, or maybe something like 100 Bullets by Brian Azzarello. It really depends. And if you're a kid and you're just trying to build confidence and trying to get your reading skills up and repeat the same stories over and over again, comic strips, traditional, newspaper comic strips are great for that. And then there are some younger readers like this one right here. Little Mouse Gets Dressed by Jeff Smith. The book's by Jennifer Holm. She covers a wide range of ages from about middle school and below. It really just depends on what do you like to read? What do you like to watch? And then there's a graphic novel for that.
I feel like graphic novels are such a good tool to get kids interested in reading in general. How have you seen that work over the years, and how graphic novels can be used as teaching tools?
Well, they're very high interest. So they're high interest with, in some cases, a low skill involvement. So if you are having a hard time with vocabulary, you can infer through the pictures what's going on and learn new words. It's also good for building things like reading expressions and empathy and understanding people, because in traditional prose fiction, you can describe a thing, but if you just showed someone a picture of someone sad or crying, then the person reading it can see that and understand that and apply it to the real world. So it can help with those kinds of social skills. It also builds something called visual literacy. So a lot of our world and how we get information these days is online, through apps, through icons, through signs. And those kinds of skills, understanding how iconography, understanding how that works is something that comics can teach.
Definitely. I feel like I wanted to touch on how you were talking about how kids learn to like read between the lines with a graphic novel. Like oftentimes kids, it's a tricky task, but when you are looking at a graphic novel, I feel like you can learn how to look at a picture and figure out what that character is going through and then match that, that feeling to a word.
Absolutely. And there are actually graphic novels that have no words in them. They're textless. There's Owly. I can't remember the author off the top of my head. The book's been around for a long time. And actually, for teens and adults, there are issues of superhero comics like Hawkeye that are completely silent because the character is deaf. So he can't hear what anyone is saying. So they actually use sign language. And if you understand sign language, you can follow that. Otherwise, you have to infer through the actions and expressions. It's a great way to build those kinds of social skills.
All right. Do you ever have parents come into the library and they're letting their child pick out a book and they pick up a graphic novel and the parents are like, that doesn't count?
All the time. And it hurts my heart a little bit because it absolutely does count. And especially if your child is struggling with reading or struggling with school, it's a great way to build confidence. It's generally a faster read, so they get the accomplishment of finishing a book. They're very repeatable. You can find new things in the pictures, new jokes every time you read them. When I was a kid, I would read the same comic like hundreds of times. And that still builds up those skills. You're still seeing the same words over and over again. You're learning vocabulary. And, in the same way that we have early readers that tie into TV shows and things like that, lots of these graphic novels and comics are being made into TV shows and movies these days. So it's a good way to tie into your child's interests as well.
Yeah. I mean, my husband watches Jessica Jones and all the Marvel shows on Netflix. Yep. And I have never read those graphic novels. And now I'm so interested in checking them out because the shows are so good.
They are fantastic. They're a little different. There's always something that gets changed in any adaptation. I really liked the first season of Jessica Jones for condensing the first about 2 years worth of stories from the comics into a very cohesive story. And that author actually has other crime novels. So if you're interested in the tone and the art and the direction, but you're not so sure about these superpowers things, there's still a book for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like the superpower things. I liked Luke Cage. I liked Iron Fist. Mm-hmm. I liked Daredevil. I was very impressed, and I wouldn't have had no idea. But luckily my husband is a graphic novels enthusiast, and he's got a couple graphic novels for a 5-year-old, and I think it's a very good teaching tool. And I also think it's really cool as like if kids are aspiring artists, because with the graphic novel, there's a layout, there's a design, and there's a flow. And with traditional novels, there isn't that.
Absolutely. Actually, at the Maine Comic-Con, I worked with an artist who came out and taught a short program about graphic memoir. And something that even me with very limited art skills could follow was he was teaching how to use metaphor visually. So you take panels from old comic strips and you match them to a story from your life. So rather than depicting exactly what happened, you're kind of depicting how it felt. So if you're angry, you're drawing an explosion instead of, just making a mean face.
Right.
And I feel like that's an excellent way to build up art skills. It's an excellent way to build up how to interact with the world.
I think that's so fascinating too, because it really is this universal form of storytelling without having to be at the mercy of a translator. You can kind of convey these complex storylines through the visual aspect, and anybody can read the work of anybody with a graphic novel.
Hieroglyphics on a cave wall, like it go all the way back to that.
And I mean, a lot of the most popular stories that we have in the library are translated from other countries. Manga, Japanese comics are very, very popular, at least with the teens and the adults that I work with, Murray Hill, and before that at the East Side branch. Stories like Naruto is super popular and has been for years. And that, it's been translated, but a lot of it you can just kind of follow through the pictures and pick up what they're trying to do. I think one of the other misconceptions that people have is that you have to start at the beginning. So you get these long running series, your superhero stories, like you were mentioning, Iron Fist or Naruto. And Naruto has almost 80 volumes. You don't have to go back to volume 1. With Iron Fist, you don't have to go back to the 70s and read the first comic. You can pick it up almost anywhere. There are some artists and writers that you're going to enjoy more than others. You can shop around. Even though it's the same character, the creators matter as well. So everybody has their own particular style or flavor to it. And you don't have to be a Spider-Man fan, you don't have to go back and read stories from the 60s. You just don't. Most of us know the origin story already. You can start wherever.
I think that's a really good piece of advice. I think that's one of the most intimidating parts of getting into graphic novels.
Yeah.
It's like, where do you start? I just feel like it's this very sort of subculture.
Because, Superman's been around since the late 1930s in some form or another. And you don't have to go back and read those stories to understand Superman. One of my favorite runs of Superman, it's a collection, is called All-Star Superman. It's by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. And the first page of the book has 4 panels. That's the way we divide up a comic book picture. And it tells the entire origin story of Superman being sent from a planet and landing here and being raised as a human in 1 page in 4 pictures with maybe 10 words. And because everybody already has that cultural background, you don't need to spend that much time. You don't need to read 70 years of comic books to read what's coming out now.
And I want to go back a little bit. I know you said that you used to work on comic books a little bit back in the day.
Yeah.
What kind of storylines did you typically write?
I worked on some superhero stories. One of my characters was like a martial artist type of character. I worked on some science fiction stories. At the time, Battlestar Galactica was really big on TV. It was still coming out, and the company I was working for wanted something with that kind of tone, so I did something with that.
Captain Adama. I love Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah, so it didn't take off as much as I would have liked, admittedly, but I tend to write more action or horror influenced things, and I was writing for an older audience.
And how does that process work? Is there a separate illustrator that you have to work side by side with, or did you do the illustrations yourself?
It depends. So every creative team is different. For me, my art skills are very limited. I can do a page breakdown, which is taking it and deciding what would go in each panels and kind of doing a rough sketch of that to get the flow of the story. It's very similar to storyboarding a movie, which is part of the reason comics make such great movies. And some people, you have one writer, one artist who does the whole book themselves. And on the big superhero books, you typically have a team of somewhere between 3 and 6 people working on a book. You've got a writer, you've got a penciler who does the initial drawings, you've got an inker who goes over them and gives them depth and shading. You have a colorist, you have an editor, and then you have the publishing team. So there's It's a lot like movies or TV, where you might have a showrunner, someone who's really upfront and like, this is my story, but then you have the support team, and everybody has to work together for it.
Are most of the graphics in a graphic novel hand-drawn, or are any of them computer generated?
That's a blurry line, because a lot of people actually use things like tablets to draw by hand digitally, and then they can correct them or color them through photo editing software. So it depends. And I know some of them are completely computer generated and some of them are still sketched out and hand drawn. But a lot of times there's a middle ground. For big superhero stories, a lot of times the initial drawings are done by hand, either on a tablet or paper. But then things like lettering, where you put the words in, are done by a computer, or done by someone using a computer, I should say.
What would you recommend someone who is interested in starting out their own comics? Like, how would they start?
I would recommend looking up panel template backgrounds, either online or actually you can go into a library, and if they might still have some. We did a program series around this. And practice the idea of breaking down by still images. So you can't just say that Tim ran to the street. You have to show Tim on the sidewalk, and then Tim running, and then Tim in the street, or how to convey the actions. I would also recommend to read a lot of graphic novels. Find your favorites, see how they break down the stories. When I was doing this, I would look at, what was it? The Buffy the Vampire Slayer comics, because they had a very traditional layout and breakdown. And I read them as a creator instead of as a fan to see how they did it. And what I found was most of the time their pages had 5 panels. They were 4 smaller ones and then 1 wide shot, like an establishing shot in the movie. And then if it was a very frantic action scene, with lots of little actions and things like that, like you would have cuts in a movie, there'd be lots of little panels up to 9. And then, if it's something big, spectacular moment, they take over the whole page for one big picture. So I think it's important to find something that you like that might match the tone of what you're creating. And see how the people that have come before you have done it, where you can improve it, and, where you can learn from it.
It's funny you mentioned Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This whole time I'm just thinking personally, my cousin was not a very big reader when he was growing up. He struggled with some learning disabilities, but graphic novels, Buffy the Vampire Slayer in particular, just totally got him engulfed in this world of graphic novels, which led him to be really,
Buffy's a superhero. It's in the comics that there are comics that take place during the show and some that take place after, and they're generally really good. We actually have most of them in our collection, and I enjoy them a great deal. And a lot of the stuff I was writing was very similar. I had an action tone or a horror tone, so that's why I turned to those for inspiration.
Yeah, and it doesn't, like you said before, it doesn't have to be a superhero theme per se. It can have those undertones, but have something that you're actually really interested in. And it's a good way to get involved in discovering graphic novels, I feel.
Absolutely. Yeah. And don't feel like you have to jump in on the deep end. If you want to start with, graphic novels, yes, absolutely. Watchmen is a great comic, but it's a great comic because of how it approaches the history of comics, how it kind of deconstructs it. It has a history behind it. So that's maybe not the best starting place, even if someone like me who's a huge fan says it's great. Maybe start somewhere where you have a personal interest. If that's not it, maybe you really want to start with Buffy. Maybe you want to start with Spider-Man, or maybe you want to start with a romance book or a memoir and just go from there. Not every starting place is right for every reader.
Do you think that graphic novels are as enjoyable on a tablet, like if you downloaded them from Hoopla? I
really like Hoopla. I use it every month. I'll get, we have 8 a month that you can get. And personally, I like reading it on the page, but that's because the tablet that I read it on is very small. But Hoopla gets around that by, if you double tap on an image, it blows up the individual panels so you can read and see all the details. One thing that's great about Hoopla is you don't have to wait. So with new books that come out, we might get a paper copy, and we'll have 3 copies or 4 copies for the library system, and 10 people are going to read it. And so you've got to wait in line, same as you would if you're getting a new movie. Or you can go on Hoopla and have it right now, which is what I do. Also, some things that are more niche audience, you'll find them on Hoopla, but we might not have a paper copy. And a lot of I've been going to some really weird places with my reading lately. And so that's how I've been getting those. Yeah, Hoopla is great. We also, I don't know if we have it yet, but Overdrive is starting to have comic books as well. They just did a license with Marvel. So those might be coming up as soon as well.
Very cool.
Speaking of Hoopla and Overdrive, we often hear that library customers either don't know about the library's digital branch or don't know how to take advantage of it. If you want to use these services, such as Hoopla and Overdrive, to experience ebooks, e-audio, movies, music, and more, and are having difficulty, you can schedule a one-on-one tutoring session with library staff and they will help you learn. Take a look at the Computers and Technology section of the library's event calendar to find a one-on-one tech tutoring session at a location near you. Feel free to call your local branch for assistance as well. Now we return to the podcast.
Do you have kind of kickoff events like specifically for Graphic Novels Month?
Well, because it is part of summer as well. So we have summer learning going on at Murray Hill, and we have the stuff that is tying in with the Universe of Stories. We have a lot of programs and things going on already, and I'm trying not to overload people with that. We'll probably have some displays, some book lists, things like that. And I tend to pull out video games if I've got a youth crowd that we don't have a program going on, and I'll probably skew more comic book related with that for the month. The time for Graphic Novel Month was chosen because of San Diego Comic-Con. So the American Library Association and Booklist wanted to capitalize on comics and graphic novels being in the public eye in a way to bring that attention back to libraries. And they're actually doing side programming at the conventions at libraries throughout the area. And that is great for bringing that attention to libraries. But for us, it's also summer learning, which is super important. So we've got to choose. We only have so much time.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like the libraries are flooded with people looking for things to occupy their time. So when you're thinking about summer learning and then you're like, oh yeah, it's also Graphic Novels Month.
Yeah, I will say that the days that I'm doing Drop Everything and Read, I will be doing comic books. So that is something that every library does. Sometime in the middle of the day, we stop and we read for 15 minutes. It's a summer learning program. And it can be anything as long as it's acceptable to be read in public. So I'll probably pull out like some Superman books, some Batgirl books, things like that.
Since July is Graphic Novels Month, what do you recommend the public do to get involved?
Come to your library, check out graphic novels, try new things, use Hoopla, read with us, do Drop Everything and read for your 15 minutes a day. Graphic novels are a great way to do that. If you're busy, if your kid is busy with, camp and sports and all these things, it doesn't have the same kind of time commitment that a novel might have. So it's much easier to fit into your day. I know for me, I read on my lunch break. I use a tablet. I go on Hoopla, and that way I'm not worried about spilling food anywhere. I can just swipe the screen, and it's a great way to fit in reading every day.
So Drop Everything and Read is a 15-minute program that the library does at every branch every day.
Yes.
Shawn, will you be doing any of those?
I will be doing some of those. We split it up amongst staff at the Murray Hill Library. So we have some of our teen volunteers like to do it. We have some other staff who like to do it. I do it maybe twice a week, and I'll be doing comic books for mine.
Very cool.
Awesome. Well, if you guys want to get into graphic novels a little bit this month, try something new, definitely check out our awesome collections at every library, but Maine definitely has a pretty good collection. And I know the Bill Brinton Murray Hill branch.
It's a mouthful.
It sure is. And I know the Bill Brinton Murray Hill branch has quite a few good ones as well. And Shawn will be there personally to give some recommendations. So thank you so much for joining us today, Shawn.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in to Completely Booked. We hope you enjoyed hearing Shawn's interview and learning about the literary merit of comics and graphic novels.
Be sure to check out JPL's blog, jackspubliclibrary.org/blog, where we continue the conversation on experiencing the wonderful world of graphic novels, and we share all of the book recommendations of our in-house graphic novels enthusiasts.
Also, if you like this podcast, be sure to rate and review us. Until next time, I'm Gabby.
And I'm Amanda. Bye for now, guys.